Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Progressively Incorrect. I'm your host, Zach Groeschel, and I'm super excited today to be speaking to my friend and colleague, Rachel Sewell. She and I are going to be talking all about effective professional development in just a moment, but I wanted to talk first about our sponsors. This podcast is sponsored by John Catt Educational, which publishes some of the best books in education, including my book, Just Tell Them, The Power of Explanations and Explicit Teaching. I will be putting a link to all the John Catt books, their entire catalog, in the show notes. I really encourage you to click on that and check it out and start your evidence-based learning journey. I also wanted to mention some important events that are coming up year-round through part of my life, which is Steplab. We are coming to the United States very soon in 2025. Go ahead and click on the link that I'm going to put into the show notes for US events. And if you're in Canada, you're invited to come as well. And we're going to be putting on a big lineup, a series of conferences on the East Coast. Go check that out. It's going to be an absolute blast. And speaking of Steplab and speaking of great PD, Rachel's here to talk to us about what that entails. And I'm so excited for you to meet her. She's amazing. Rachel, how are you doing today?
Hey Zach, good thanks. Unlike you, I've had a whole day already. It's the end of the day. It's the evening for me, but I'm good. Great to be here.
You've taught me a ton as we've kind of put together some really great courses for teachers. Well, first of all, kind of in an elevator pitch, could you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Rachel. Right now, I'm StepLab's Director of Implementation. So that means I have a really fun job where I work with schools and multi-school organizations on designing and running really impactful professional development programs with StepLab. And I work with our education team. So we spend all day working directly with schools, talking to them, visiting them, and looking at how to design, really effective PD programs. But first and foremost, I'm an English teacher. I was an English teacher in London for 13 years. And I was also, before I left the classroom and started working for Steplab, which was just over 2 years ago. So as well as teaching English, I was vice principal for 2 days a week at what's one of our hub schools now, St. Mark's Academy. So it's a kind of beacon of excellence for coaching. And I set Steplab up and instructional coaching up there years and years ago. And they've still got a really whizzy coaching program that's thriving. So I did that for 2 days a week. And then I spent the rest of my week working across our Multi Academy Trust, which is a multi school organization on, teacher education. So designing effective PD. And I use StepLab a lot to run those PD programs. So that's me. And now it's ace that I get to work with thousands of schools rather than just 15.
Well, one thing is that we is commonly experienced, and I guess I admit that I expressed this view before, is that teacher PD is often very bad. It's very ineffective. And a
Mhm.
lot of teachers get so much ineffective PD in a row consecutively that they start to even doubt that it could even be a lever to
Yeah.
improve schools. So I really wanted you to kind of illuminate sort of what are the ingredients, or I guess the paper you're going to refer to has to do with the mechanisms of
Yeah.
effective PD. It's funny we even have to start there, but you kind of do. What makes great PD and what makes it effective?
Great question. And I really like the way you framed it by talking about what's problematic, because I think anybody listening here who's experienced teacher training, let's face it, any kind of adult education has probably experienced that feeling of sitting in a room, being talked at by somebody for 45 minutes, maybe even for a lot longer, and sitting there feeling really frustrated and thinking, I'm busy, I've got assessments to mark, I've got lessons to plan, I've got hundreds of things to do, and you feel really disengaged. And that's just not good enough, is it? Um, and that's something that we really believe in at Step Lab. So, yeah, you're quite right. I'm going to talk about a paper that was released in 2021 by an organization called the Education Endowment Foundation. They're based in the UK, and they're a charity who essentially research evidence-based approaches to improving the education attainment, particularly looking at some of the poorest students in English schools. And they produced this incredible report called the professional development guidance report. And that was actually contributed to by some of our colleagues at Steplab, people like Harry Fletcher Wood. And as part of that study, the team of researchers essentially looked at a meta-analysis of 104 research studies on effective PD, and really crucial to kind of crystallize what we mean by effective PD. And when we talk about effective PD, we mean PD that leads to lasting improvement to teachers' practice. So it actually makes them go and change something and go and do something differently as a result of the session that has a more positive impact on learning. So that study went on to essentially identify 4 components and then 14 mechanisms of really great PD. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking through those components and talking through those mechanisms. Zach, just before I do that, what does the report kind of mean to you? I know you've seen it in the UK. It's really interesting because more or less everybody you talk to who's running PD now has seen it. They've been exposed to it. And that's because of lots of kind of government training and focus on ensuring that there's more centralized leadership training for leaders. So I know that's different for you. Say something to me about why it's important to you, that report.
Yeah, well, I think mainly it's that right now that I'm kind of in the consulting world, I think about schools that are looking to use PD to make some big changes, but they need a little bit of direction from
Yeah.
me because often enough, what they think is best would be, Zach, come down for this wonderful sit and get PD. You're going to present on cognitive load theory, and we are going to change minds and we are going to change hearts, right? You're going to go into the strands and the mechanism specifically, but
Mhm.
what this paper tells me is that there needs to be more than simply conveying information in a whole group
Yeah.
setting, basically.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what you've just set up there is a way better scenario. Like I talked about that problem of feeling bored, someone talking at you for 45 minutes. I know that doesn't happen when you deliver sessions and people feel motivated and they feel excited, but are they guaranteed to go away and change their practice? Well, we're not sure. So we're going to unpick that. Ace. Okay. So, as you just said, that essentially the EF have codified what makes really impactful professional development. And they did that to begin with by identifying 4 components or 4 strands that make really effective PD. So those 4 components or strands are: number 1, building teachers' knowledge; number 2, motivating staff; number 3, supporting teachers to develop effective teaching techniques; and number 4, supporting them to embed those techniques into their practice. So before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of the different mechanisms, let's just talk about what we mean by those 4 things. So if we think about number 1, building teachers' knowledge, what that means is that to develop their practice, teachers need insight into how learning happens. They need to know the theory behind how we learn. So let's just use an example. If we wanted teachers to understand something about the working memory, perhaps we want them to understand that the working memory is composed of separate phonological and visuospatial systems, each of which has limited capacity. That is some knowledge that we need them to understand. Just having that knowledge, however, isn't going to support them to change things about their practice. The next thing that we need is number 2, we need to motivate staff. And the paper describes this as motivating staff around goal-directed behaviour. So if I'm going to change something, for example, about the way I convey information to my students, and if I'm going to think about cognitive load theory and how to reduce cognitive load, I can use my insight into how learning happens. I can use my knowledge, but I need to feel involved in setting a goal that's going to change my practice. So, for example, I might decide that I'm going to start to limit the information on my slides, or I'm going to start to talk over an image rather than talking over lengthy text, so that I am activating both of those parts of working memory at the same time. So far, we've got building some knowledge and we've got a goal that I feel motivated to work towards. The third thing that we need to think about is developing teaching techniques. So I need to know, well, what does good slide design look like? I need to perhaps see some examples. I need to be supported to tweak that. I need to practice that process. I need to develop that as a technique. And then finally, I need to not just do this once, but I need to build this as a habit. I need to embed that into my practice as something that I always think about whenever I'm designing slides or resources for a lesson. And that is the fourth component, which is all around embedding practice.
And what I think is really important about this, and we'll dig into some of these elements, is that a lot of different formats of PD, right? We know that there's peer observation or drop-ins could be a type of PD, or there could be like some department work or PLC work where you meet with each other, right? Not all PD has to be the sit and get format that I mentioned at the beginning. But what is crucial is whatever the PD system is that you sort of design for your school, that it is mechanism rich. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, exactly. So we haven't started talking yet about the mechanisms. We've just talked about the components. And what the paper says is that as long as a PD program has a balanced design, and what they mean by a balanced design is that they have mechanisms from each of those four components, not all 14 mechanisms, but a spread from each of the four, then it's much more likely to affect teacher change, so to improve teachers' practice. So really interesting that you cited examples like PLCs, like Dylan Williams Professional Learning Communities, like those can be really powerful. And that's because they're drawing on those four components. They're building knowledge, they're creating a sense of motivation. Really good ones support teachers to develop techniques. And then there's social support there, and there are things that mean that teachers actually embed those changes into their practice. What's really brilliant about starting to think about PD in this way is that it's not this idea of PD always has to be in a set format, or only instructional coaching will work, only PLCs will work. Instead, it's thinking, okay, well, how can we step back and look at the design of our overall program and think about which components are present? And we can do that by thinking about some really specific mechanisms, which I think we're going to chat about in a bit more detail.
Yeah, how about you go ahead and just read them, I guess, so that people know what we're talking about. But then we'll kind of dig in because I'm especially interested in those that you're going to list that we don't often use in PD.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first two in building knowledge, number one is about reducing cognitive load. So for example, just like we talked about, needing to think about the strain on students' working memory in lessons. We need to think about that for teachers. So part of that might be about how we're delivering content, but it's also about not having too many confusing messages or goals or ideas at the same time. So like Mary Kennedy talks about this idea that schools are noisy places. When we're designing a really good PD program, we need to be managing teachers' cognitive load by supporting them to focus their attention on one thing, on one goal at a time. The second mechanism within building knowledge and developing teachers' understanding of how learning happens is that, as well as reducing their cognitive load and allowing them to focus on things, we need to remember that teachers learn much like students. So the next mechanism is about building on prior knowledge. So just like students, teachers need really great curriculum planning. They need to come back to ideas repeatedly, and they need those ideas built upon incrementally as they become more confident and more familiar with them. So that's the first one. It's all around building knowledge.
See, I'm already thinking, right? And I love to present listeners on this podcast with contrast. I'm an example person. So I'm sorry if I get negative to compare this positive example to the negative one, but I'm just picturing a PD session. It's a Friday, people are tired, and we come in, and given that the school actually is selected content that's even good, you might have one of these things where there are just slide after slide of things and definitions, and not only that, not only are the teachers overloaded because it's not granular enough,
Mm-hmm.
but and where there's no practice perhaps involved, there's no discussion about how can this relate to my life, and so on. It's just a lot of like listening. But not only that, you have this heterogeneous group in front of you, which they're all at different levels. It's not
Yeah.
it's not personalized, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm getting out of this already, is that
Mm.
you're going to fall into that trap. Not saying that Friday PD is wrong, but it's only a launching point perhaps to other things.
Yeah.
And how it was designed didn't think about our teachers and how they best learn either.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we come back to that idea of like cognitive load. It's so easy for us to feel overloaded and overwhelmed as teachers and to switch off. Like there's that amazing Lee Schulman quotation that compares teaching to an emergency room, that it's like it's so complex. There just isn't really anything else out there that's more complicated. So I think what we need to remember about that Friday afternoon PD is that teachers arrive already feeling overloaded, and their brains are already full of millions of different things. If we then stand in front of them and deliver a session that is too complex, and also it feels like it's not designed for them. So we sometimes talk about the Goldilocks effect. It's too hot, too cold. It is very, very rarely just right. It's a session that's all about cognitive load theory. And I can't even get my English class to like sit in their seats and listen to me. Then I'm going to switch off really quickly.
Totally, right. And you get that where in these evaluations for PD, if they do like a form or something at the end, you get it where inevitably, and I've had to do this, where you get a lot of people saying you gave a lot of examples in secondary classrooms, it didn't apply to me, or this seemed very basic. I wanted something more, right? And you get that kind of thing where this wasn't matched to level or to expertise or to experience because of the
Exactly.
format, really.
Exactly, exactly. And so it's super easy for teachers to just switch off in those sessions. And that's fair enough because they're not receiving curriculum planning that's personalized to them and is helping them to solve the learning problems that their students are facing, essentially.
Think, folks, because we don't have a visual for you, think we went to the top of this really wonderful kind of a chart that has like boxes, and we're moving down to the next level.
Yeah, brilliant. So we've got build knowledge. There's two mechanisms that we've just talked about. We're now moving to the next level, which is motivate staff. Within that, we've got three mechanisms that we can activate to motivate our staff. So the first one is setting and agreeing on goals. And I think the key word there is agreeing on goals. So as a teacher, if I want to change something about my practice, I'll keep using that slide design example. I need to feel that this was a problem in my lesson, and I need to feel it's something that I need to fix. If that just gets imposed on me, if I feel like, oh, the head teacher or the school leaders are just coming around and they're auditing and they're checking that my slides look as good as they think they need to be, there's a strong chance I'll feel demotivated. But if I'm involved in identifying that challenge and thinking about how I'm going to overcome it, then I'm much more likely to feel motivated and much more likely to change my practice. A big part of that motivation is that information coming from a credible source. So that's the next mechanism in that kind of row, that idea of information coming from a credible source. So that might be that the PD session that I'm receiving is research informed, it's evidence informed. It's not just someone standing up and talking about something that they're interested in. It's also often about the credibility of the person that's delivering that professional development. So whether that's someone that's talking to a big group, or perhaps you're receiving instructional coaching, or you're receiving training from someone who's leading a professional learning community, that person needs to feel like somebody who's credible, knows their stuff, and has your best interests at heart as well. And then the final one in motivate staff, really obvious, teachers are social beings. It's called providing affirmation and reinforcement. So if I've set a goal, I feel that that goal is worthwhile because there's evidence to back it up. I've been having a go at giving explanations over stripped back text or just an image. And a peer notices me doing that and they say, "Hey, Rachel, that explanation was so slick. The combination of your explanation teamed with that image, the students were just focusing, they were listening so carefully. And, when I asked them to repeat back to me what you'd said, they understood it super clearly. I'm going to feel that sense of affirmation and that I've made a micro bit of progress. And I'm going to want to keep working on that goal and keep chipping away at it."
Love it. I'm thinking in that last one, often the role of like testimonials in
Mhm.
whole group settings where teachers can talk about some of the things that they've been working on. I
Yeah.
also think about like how if you create that open door culture at your school and we're
Yeah.
dropping
Mhm.
in, all of a sudden you're around the water cooler and you're not talking about baseball. You're talking about what happened in your classroom, and all of a sudden you guys are both mutually giving, affirming each other's sort of growth, and
Yeah,
there's this just this
exactly.
sense of a buzz in the school of things are getting
Mhm.
better and we're learning from each other.
Yeah, and I really like that idea that it can be as a group. It doesn't have to be just like one-to-one individuals. It's this sense of like collectively, this is how we do it here. We're all working together to get a little bit better, and we're going to celebrate and congratulate, giving things a go that are evidence informed and the positive impact that they have on students.
Love it. So, there has to be some building knowledge, and then there has
Hmm.
to be some motivation. We've got knowledge, we got motivation. Here's where things get interesting. I'm excited.
Yeah. Okay. So this is where we start to talk about developing teaching techniques. The first mechanism that we see there is instruction. And I'm aware that I'm preaching to the choir here, but for me, this is really important. Teachers need quality instruction. I don't think discovery learning for teachers works very often. Instead, they need really high quality information about the techniques that work. This is where lots of the mechanisms here start to overlap. So, another mechanism within developed teaching techniques is around modeling. So, for me, as part of high quality instruction, teachers need to see really strong models. So, that might be a video model, or it might be me standing up in a PD session or as a coach and delivering a really context specific model. But they need essentially a mental model of what that teaching technique looks like when it's working really well. And they need some instruction on the mechanisms or the success criteria that underpin that teaching technique so that they're looking and focusing on the right things and they really understand, okay, what are the things that make this specific technique work? And perhaps how can I avoid things like lethal mutations? They need to have thought quite deeply about that technique.
And so you've got modeling, but then, it's not enough to model something to someone, right? And that's kind of the first step, a launching point to getting them to really embed that practice. What else is on there?
So, if we think about some others, another one on there is social support. So, that comes back to this idea. It's very linked to receiving that affirmation. Teachers are social beings. Teaching can be really lonely if you're just in your classroom all day long, sometimes having a difficult time and you don't have the opportunity to connect with peers. And that social support is super powerful. We also imitate and copy each other. So, working with a peer on developing a technique is really powerful. Again, this is where they all interlink. So, another technique on there is rehearsal. So you might have heard that referred to as deliberate practice. But let's say I'm working on something like my routine for securing attention. Perhaps I'm thinking about my positive narration. It's going to be really powerful for me to have the opportunity to script and then rehearse that specific technique with a peer. So I might have received some instruction on the why behind that technique, the theory. I might have watched a model, unpicked it, named the component parts. To go back to this idea of discovery learning doesn't really work. I don't want to just go into my classroom and just give it a go and discover what works and what doesn't. Instead, I want the opportunity to try it out with a partner. I want to script it and I want to rehearse it. And this is another mechanism within there, monitoring and feedback. So it's really helpful if with a colleague, I have someone that's like, hey, Rachel, when you delivered that call for silence, I thought your observable instructions were super clear. Do you know what? Warm it up a little bit. Give it another go. Don't sound quite so severe and harsh. Warm it up. Go again. And then from there, I'm having this opportunity to practice, to try it out. And it just massively increases the likelihood that A, I'm going to give it a go when I return to the classroom setting. And B, I'm going to give it a go and it's going to go well because I've had the opportunity to kind of monitor it and receive a bit of feedback. So just to recap, we've talked about 5 mechanisms there. We've talked about some instruction on a technique, social support, working with peers on having a go at that technique. We've talked about the importance of seeing that modeled and unpicking and deconstructing that model and it being a really high quality model. We've talked about the opportunity to rehearse it, having seen the model, and then receiving some monitoring and feedback. That might be as part of the rehearsal process. It might be when I go back to my classroom, I have the opportunity to monitor it, to receive a bit of feedback with a peer, because we know that although rehearsal supports with like upgrading pre-existing habits, we have to rehearse things multiple times and in like realistic settings. So rehearsal outside of the classroom begins that process. It then continues when we head back into the classroom.
Love it. With rehearsal, which you said is similar to deliberate practice. But
Mhm.
I originally, when I remember seeing this report, thinking of rehearsal more like kind of like in the model of the mind, like what's happening. You're like rehearsing things in your mind. But I've heard
Mhm.
you give the analogy of like rehearsal before like you go perform in the orchestra or you do it's like
Yeah.
a dress rehearsal,
Mhm.
right? Actually
Exactly.
using the more common term for rehearsal to be like there is this thing we're going to do in the next lesson, and
Mhm.
I would like you to practice it without all the messiness. And
Yeah.
then I will actually give you a few little tips with a little bit of messiness kind of simulated. And we're going to kind of
Yeah.
simulate this whole thing so that when you go out there in front of the live audience, the kids,
Mhm.
your cognitive load is reduced and you can focus on the kids in front of you and in performing this in the best way possible.
Exactly. Yeah. So at Steplab, we very much feel that rehearsal is about like preparation for the lesson. It's not just thinking it through. And I think as well, really important to highlight that it has an element of like co-planning or planning as well. It's not just, okay, right, stand up, you're going to practice it immediately. It's pull up the next lesson. Let's think about the moment when you're first going to call for attention, or let's take a look at one of your slides. Let's think about how we can simplify it and plan for reducing cognitive load. Okay, let's work on that together. Let's check it. Let's check that we're happy. Bit of monitoring and feedback. Okay, now you're ready and we've done that planning. Perhaps we've done a little bit of scripting. Let's rehearse.
I love that. And these are things I've like learned myself through trial and error as a coach, where I'd work with the teacher and I would jump to modeling it without like kind of maybe framing it, talking about
Yeah.
it. Or like you said, a lot of times it's elbow to elbow, like with a piece of paper, and you're just sort of writing something down, or you're at a whiteboard together and you're writing some stuff down, and you're like, now we've kind of have this plan in place. Now, let's have you practice it, not kind of jumping to, hey, you try it, you go do it. There is more of an iterative and sort of dialogic process to this
Yeah.
that you can certainly train coaches to do.
And I think that that's where the rehearsal when you're coaching becomes like linked to the kind of monitoring and feedback, because it's not enough to just model a step to someone. You need them to have a go at it, and you can't be 100% sure as a coach that they've got it until you've watched them, they've tried it out, you've given them feedback, they've tried it out again, because it takes a lot to reprogram someone's mental models of effective teaching, and that process really works. It really does.
Love that. Something you mentioned before we kind of go to the last strand
Mhm.
here. Something you mentioned is the importance of the teacher accepting or acknowledging that goal. However, there are different approaches to doing this. One, I think the most common is essentially you come to a lesson unprepared. You come to a coaching session unprepared and you
Mhm.
say, what would you like to work on? And the teacher sort of, in my experience, kind of waffles on about a bunch of different things and it's really unstructured and unguided. How do you
Yeah.
kind of fix that within a sort of step lab type of structure?
I think that's so interesting. And certainly when I first started coaching, because I wanted to make my coachee feel motivated and to feel like I was worried about them feeling like they didn't have enough autonomy. So I'd often ask them that question. But the problem that I would encounter, much like yours, is that they would say lots of different things, or they might say something like, well, I really want to work on my questioning. I want to work on, I don't know, stretching the really bright students in my class. I'd be like, okay, I'm going to come and watch you next week. And then I'd go and watch them and I'd realize that actually securing attention, managing students' behavior was a problem. And we needed to get that right first. And then that would create almost like a point of conflict from the get go, because they would have told me they wanted to work on one thing. I would feel like perhaps it would be better for us to start with something different. And then our conversation would begin in quite a tricky way. At StepLab, what we advocate is that you do have a contracting conversation at the beginning, but that contracting conversation goes more like, I'm going to come to your lesson, I'm going to watch it really carefully, I'm going to gather evidence, I'm going to watch what the students are saying, what they're thinking, what they're writing, and then I'm going to come to you with some hypotheses about some possible learning problems that we could maybe work on together, and we'll go from there. And so for me, it's like you start at a different point. It's like you do the contracting, you describe what's going to happen, you go and observe the lesson, and at that point, using actual kind of evidence, this happened, I saw students doing this, you called for attention, 10 students were still tapping their pens. Talk to me about that. How do you feel about that? You can very much co construct and agree those goals. but you're doing it with a lot more information than if you just get going from the beginning by agreeing what you're going to work on without having really visited the lesson.
Absolutely. And you mentioned sort of these kind of STEM sentences that have really transformed my view on coaching and my approach, where when you say like tell me about the moment when or tell me about the do now, like what was happening there, what you do is you narrow the scope of what the teacher wants to explore during that meeting. They want to talk about anything that you want to talk about. This is a
Yeah,
discussion, you have a good relationship with them, but if you open that up to anything, it becomes about students' behavior. It becomes about some of the school's kind of formalities they don't like, and so on and so forth. But
exactly.
you say, tell me about that do now, and specifically this part of the do now. And now
Hmm.
they know that you're on their side and that you want to focus on this. And this is a
Yeah,
good place to start as any because of all this evidence you gathered. And the
exactly.
discussion is so much more targeted.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And to me, that's all about the coach being a credible source, which is one of the mechanisms we just talked about. So like you need to really trust your coach when you're receiving instructional coaching and feel that they are an objective pair of eyes at the back of the room who are gathering evidence and genuinely have the student's best interests and your best interests at heart. They're truth seeking. That okay, and they're not, they're not coming in with an agenda. And therefore, I think when you start from that point of objectivity, then that idea of working together, like you say, tell me about the moment when I noticed that. It means that you're narrowing down the learning problem together. And then from there, you can work on deciding on the goal.
I love that. Before we move on, because the next part's so crucial, I think what distinguishes, or I guess it supports the idea of instructional coaching is this next embedding practice piece. But
Mhm.
a lot of PD doesn't include modeling, practice, and feedback.
Yeah,
And let's take the example of Dylan Williams' PLC kind of model,
yeah,
where it could be that in a kind of a group setting, sort of a group coaching setting almost, that there are models that are planned. There is group rehearsal that is
yeah,
planned and done together, and we give each other feedback and we
yeah.
rehearse together. But it doesn't happen that often. It just seems like it's one of
Mhm.
those missing
Yeah.
ingredients to almost any sort of professional learning environment that you find yourself in as a teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. Like my experience of professional learning communities is that without the opportunity for that modeling and rehearsal, it becomes quite hard to kind of see, well, what's been the change? Like they might have built knowledge to think about that first component, and they might have experienced some social support and maybe a bit of affirmation, but is there anything actually observably different about their teaching as a result? Usually there isn't without some element of modeling rehearsal. Remember at Steplab, we're defining that rehearsal as that could be co-planning as well, but crucially, that opportunity for peer feedback. And for me, when you introduce that as well, so the element and the peer feedback, hey, Zach, we've been in the same PLC together. We've been talking about turn and talk. We've dug into why it's so effective for driving thought. We've thought about what good one looks like. We've watched a model. I'm going to give it a go in my English lesson tomorrow. Will you come and watch me? And that's what we're about to start talking about. That's where you start to see the kind of embedding practice.
Love it. Well, go ahead, launch into that. I'm excited.
So, in embedding practice, we've got four mechanisms. And again, like they really interlink and speak to each other. So, the first one is about providing prompts and cues. And the second one is prompting action planning. The third one is encouraging self monitoring. And then the fourth one is prompting context specific repetition. So, I'm going to talk about what those mean in the Steplab model. So, if we think about that first one, providing prompts and cues, in the dream scenario, I've been to this professional development session. Maybe it's a professional learning community that's been supercharged with some modeling and some rehearsal. I have decided that, let's use turn and talk as an example. I absolutely want to go away and start using really clear turn and talks with really tight timings in my lesson. I've set this goal. I've built knowledge. I feel motivated. I've begun to develop some techniques and a kind of picture of what that looks like. I get into my lesson, a wasp flies into the classroom, the projector breaks. Like it's really easy for me to just like forget to make that change or for me to feel too overloaded that I just go back and rely on my old habits. And then I start instead just, I don't know, using cold call or using whole class discussion. And I haven't got everybody thinking in the way that I was hoping. So what we want to do is we want to like train teachers to notice prompts and cues. So sometimes that's about, let's open up your slides for tomorrow's lesson. Let's open up your lesson plan. Let's look at your booklet. Where's that first turn and talk going to go? And then we plan it in. And that's going to make it so much easier for me to enact the change, even if I feel really overloaded. Sometimes, if we're thinking about when to use the right technique, for example, so if I've mastered that secure attention, it's about training teachers to know, well, when do you use that technique? So it's not enough to just use a really great call for attention at the start of the lesson. I also need to be trained to be prompted by students' behaviors and the things they're doing to use the technique at the right time. So to notice, okay, I'm halfway through an explanation, but actually I've got 5 students that are tapping their pens and they're not sitting in slant anymore and they're not listening to me. So I'm going to do my call for attention. And that is also part of what we think about at Steplab when we're thinking about providing prompts and cues. Sometimes it's the students themselves and their behaviors that prompt us to do something. Like a really expert teacher who's nailed turn and talk might not have it planned into their lesson, but they might be like, do you know what? This is a key concept that they haven't got. We're just going to pause and we're going to quickly do a turn and talk. So again, like the student understanding there is prompting them to do something. A kind of scaffold towards that is this idea of prompting action planning. So we've mentioned a few times that at the end of any kind of PD, you need to plan something into your next lesson. You need to kind of make a change. So that's thinking about, okay, tweaking a resource, changing it so I'm ready for tomorrow's lesson to go and make that change. Sometimes it can be, I'm going to stick a sign at the back of my classroom that says like, remember to pause after your call for attention, or I'm going to write something on my clipboard, or I'm going to set a little reminder on my phone that just bings at me before my difficult maths class tomorrow morning. It's something that just helps you think about the fact that as a teacher, schools are noisy. You're thinking about a million different things at once. So you need to be prompted to actually make that change. We're almost there. There's 2 more. The third one is encouraging self-monitoring. And again, these are really interlinked. So we, like my colleague Rachel Ball, talks about the speed camera effect. So we need to make sure that teachers aren't just changing their practice because a speed camera or a school leader or a coach is coming into their classroom. They're not just going to do that call for attention or that turn and talk because the colleague is in the room and they want to not get fined or not get told off, to use the speed camera analogy. But instead, they're monitoring their own practice. So they're aware, okay, now would be a great time for me to use that call for attention. And even better, they're able to just reflect and think, okay, that kind of worked. But actually, if I'd used that warmer tone like we practiced yesterday, then that might have worked even better. So it's them thinking about being able to kind of self-monitor and alter their practice in the moment as well. And then finally, prompting context-specific repetition is the last mechanism. And that speaks to this idea that it's not enough to just rehearse 3 times in a PD session. It's not enough to just go and try out that turn and talk or that call for attention in the lesson the next day. I need to repeatedly practice. So I need to repeat that technique again and again and again in order for it to be a new habit and in order to upgrade previous habits with better ones.
Love it. So basically, spaced repetition for
Exactly.
teaching. I love that, and I think this is a great transition to talking about sort of how Steplab kind of incorporates all of these mechanisms in some
Yeah.
way or another. How there's an
Yeah.
intelligent design behind
Mhm.
this approach that when I'm trying to pitch Steplab to schools here, it's hard to communicate this because
Mhm.
so many schools are really just not just starting on their evidence-based learning journey or
Yeah.
just starting to think about how PD could be
Mhm.
used better. And I have to start at square one. How is StepLab kind of designed the platform and the approach so that it's mechanism rich?
Yeah, really great question. And I think the key thing to highlight is that in a PD program, you don't have to activate all 14 mechanisms. You're looking for that balanced design. However, We think Steplab does activate all 14 mechanisms. So that means that you can build a PD program that draws on the ones that work in your context. A bit of a plug for a really great blog that our colleagues Rachel Ball and Ollie Lovell wrote about that you might want to share with people that basically takes this paper and talks about how Steplab activates some of those mechanisms. I think maybe the better way for me to talk about this is to think about like my own experience when I was designing PD and running and leading it. And when I got Steplab, it was just an absolute game changer for solving some of the really big challenges that you face with those mechanisms. So first of all, if we think about that building knowledge, your average teacher doesn't have time to be really research informed. In fact, your average school leader doesn't have time to read all the latest studies, etc., and to design a really intelligent, thoughtful curriculum for their staff. So at Steplab, we've done that work for you. So you have got what we call insight modules or study modules. They're deliberately called insight modules because they build teachers' insight into how learning happens. And those are ready-made interactive modules that follow a really careful curriculum that start with securing attention. They share the evidence and the theory behind that. They have model videos. They have interactive questions that help you to think about what to notice in those model videos. So that difficult piece of building knowledge is there. And that's useful whether if you're someone who, like me, was struggling to find the time to design and run really research and evidence informed PD and was agonizing over my curriculum design for ages. But that's also a game changer if you're an individual teacher in a school and perhaps you're hungry for a bit more and you want to build your own knowledge. It's all there and you can work through those modules in your own time.
Love it. And so basically, it just to kind of paint a picture for some too is that StepLab gets its name for its steps, which are in a library, but these steps are organized in such a way so that you can going first of all they're in strands so that you can kind of organize them in your head based on like a working memory model or model of the mind, but also within there are these insight modules, sort of courses that are quick, snappy, and that bring the evidence to schools that leaders just may not have the expertise to be able to do or to
Exactly.
self-teach in a fast enough
Yeah.
time. We got
Mhm.
kids here, we got to teach them, right? So there's that component. So there's a building knowledge. What about motivation and techniques?
Okay, so in terms of motivation and techniques, like we've talked a lot about providing affirmation after progress. So something that anyone who knows anything about StepLab knows is that we're super into shout outs. So on StepLab, there's some functionality called a drop in, where you can basically just take your phone or your device and you go and drop in on a colleague and you leave them some feedback. And if you want to, you can click our shiny blue shout out button and you can write a shout out for a colleague to celebrate them doing something brilliant. And so let's say, for example, that in a professional learning community meeting or in a PD session, you have looked at one of those insight modules, you've built your knowledge, you've watched a model video, you've read a really short evidence summary. You can then support each other to actually go and make that change through dropping in on lessons and writing really granular, celebratory, and affirming praise and feedback that gives you that sense of progress. So you've talked a bit, Zach, already about StepLab gets its name because it's made up of individual steps. Those steps are grouped into goals. So if I'm happy that my goal is to work on my turn and talk for a while, and then someone comes into my lesson and they see me nailing an element of that turn and talk, they see me using really tight timings, insisting on students facing each other and being knee to knee, and it really working. And then I get a drop in and a shout out that's actually like publicly visible on the homepage to everyone in my school, then that makes me feel even more motivated. I get that just little sense of success. And if we think about developing techniques, it's activating that social support as well.
And you talk a lot about taking kind of a curricular approach to
Mm.
organizing these steps, teachers, where you're not going to just go into pair talk and immediately like leave it after sort of a single instance of
Yeah.
sort of success, you're going to build on that success. Like you're going to come back to that meeting and you already sort of have, just like a really great curriculum designer, you already have the steps in mind, like how would be best to be sequenced. And so you're
Yeah.
like, so now that you achieve this one thing that so brilliantly, there's just like this extra tweak that we could do to it that's not going to ditch this goal. And I find that very motivating and actually kind of game changing for a lot of coaching programs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so true. So, like we often advise schools that when they first start using drop-ins, they begin with the positive. So they just do the shout outs, they celebrate the things that are working really well. But you're quite right. When that culture's there, then you can suggest a tweak that builds on prior knowledge and builds on that skill that a teacher has already nailed. So if they've nailed those tight timings and students talking knee to knee in paired talk, the next thing they might do is suggest a tweak where the teacher's actively circulating and modeling active listening to pairs to ensure that that talk is high quality. And that's just a really sensible next step. Again, hard for people to visualize, but when you click to do a drop in, you can write your shout out, you can click suggest next step, go to the steps about turn and talk, and you've got a whole bunch of ready made, evidence informed, sensible, granular next steps that really support with keeping teachers feeling like, yeah, I'm just getting a little bit better every single week working on one tiny thing at a time.
What one of the big questions I get is like, what happens if I get a teacher who doesn't change at all after we met and I went to the classroom and it didn't really happen? And I always ask like, was the only time you talked about it that one time, right? You know what I mean? Like this is the
Yeah.
part about thinking
Mhm.
ahead and thinking of how steps can build on each other and create this curricular incremental approach where let's say that they didn't do it the first time. You come
Yeah.
back, we're still on the step, we're thinking about it, and then
Mhm.
they achieve it, and then we add and we build. But that pair talk never goes away. That pair
No.
talk is part of perhaps you're linking it in a cluster somehow to circulation or
Yeah.
to individual accountability or whatever the next step is, right? So
Yeah.
it's awesome.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, so I mean, we're hopefully you're starting to see that we're activating loads of these mechanisms. Some that we haven't talked about really explicitly is the model videos. So on Steplab, there is this library. It's divided into goals and steps. There are hundreds and hundreds of really high quality model videos from a range of different subjects, students of a range of different ages, all over the world now, increasingly. And so that bank of model videos for me at school was a game changer. Like I remember when Steplab introduced them in a holiday, and I literally had staff coming to find me, being like, "Hey, Rachel, have you seen the videos? Did you see the video of the call for attention? Did you see all the students that do slant and they all sit up and they fold and they cross their arms? We could get the kids at this at our school to do that. Like they're ready. Can you give us some training on that?" And it was amazing for me that your average teacher who teaches, they're super busy. They don't get to go and see other teachers teach very often. They didn't have the luxury that I had of teaching a bit less and having more time to visit other people's lessons. And being exposed to that video was just so motivating for them. And I think that bank of quality videos, like Harry Fletcher Wood talks about the magic of models, like those model videos, there's evidence that it changes teachers' practice to see really great techniques broken down and really granular and really clear. And as a PD leader, I don't want to add up how many hours I used to spend like searching the internet for good model videos.
And there's nothing on there. I
No.
talk to people about like we all love Teach Like a Champion over at Steplab,
Yeah.
but it's like
Yeah.
those videos are they're behind a paywall or there's like five that are on YouTube, and they're like the breadth of what is possible and happens in a classroom has never been documented in such a way that we have in our library where you can actually
Exactly.
get a model for each step, 70% or
Yeah.
so, but always adding the 200 more, last month or whatever.
Yeah.
I love that. And finally, kind of the embedding practice piece, which for
Mhm.
me, this is where I go for schools who don't like coaching, or maybe they don't really know what it is, or they haven't really bought into it. This is where I think coaching is so important because
Mhm.
PD is often abstract and divorced from the classroom. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
So do you want me to talk particularly about coaching and why that's so powerful? Is that
Or
helpful?
just the last strand of the mechanisms,
Yeah,
how Steplab kind of addresses the embedded practice part.
yeah. So the embedding practice, I've talked quite a bit about drop-ins and how much they support you to embed practice. So I won't talk any more about that. What I will talk about is just, I suppose, how intelligent the design is on StepLab to just prompt you to do things. So, if you come and watch me, Zach, and you think my turn and talk's great, but now I need to work on my circulation, you can suggest a drop-in. You can say, hey, Rachel, go and see Josh. That's something that he's really good at. And then on my homepage, I have a little reminder and a little nudge that says like suggested drop in, go see Josh. And I can just click on it and go and do it. So I've got a to-do list. Similarly, if the person leading my PD or my coach has assigned me an insight module or a study module on Turn and Talk, that's there on my homepage just to remind me, click and do it. Takes 10-15 minutes. I can do it when I'm having a cup of coffee between other tasks. So I think the level of like careful prompting is really intelligent on the site. And then of course, instructional coaching is super powerful. We know that instructional coaching activates so many of those mechanisms, and Steplab is full of resources that train you as a coach, that scaffold and support you to receive and deliver really impactful coaching. And I agree with you that, Zach, that is where some of the magic starts to happen of the embedding practice. It's when you've got that like one-to-one relationship with somebody who's coming week on week to support you.
And they're coming week on week, and they're planning to create a session that basically it's hard to describe this because when I show it to people, it blows people's minds. They're like, this is so sick. You are planning through your observation, your models, and your rehearsal. You're
Yeah.
essentially taking this document that we started with, and you are creating a solution or an opportunity for that teacher that is mechanism rich. And
Mhm.
that way your discussion, your conversation is it's efficient. It drives their habits and develops their insights. It builds their awareness of what's going on, and
Mm.
it's all it's all interlinked. This PD system is like it's comprehensive and it's interactive, and um, I just
Yeah.
I love it. And I'm just curious, like how many schools in the UK and worldwide could you estimate are using step labbing? Sort of how's it going in terms of
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, great question. So, like thousands is the answer using StepLab, and yeah, we get to hear good news and success stories the entire time about just the incremental impact that introducing some of these different things is having. So, just before I joined this call with you, I met with a school who launched StepLab a couple of months ago. They've just been working on securing attention. They've been using the model videos. They've launched drop-ins, and they've gone from their staff receiving feedback like once every 4 or 5 weeks and not seeing high quality model videos to just suddenly a complete shift and change.
I love it. I will be putting links in the show notes for everybody. You can come check it out. Of course, you can book a demo with us at any time. I will personally demo it for you, or I can get one of my colleagues to sort of demo regardless of your time zone. We figured that out. This is something I think is really great for America and for Canada. And that's what I'm charged to do right now is sort of to introduce this to so many folks. We're going to have some intensives coming up in
Mm,
May 2025. And you've run this intensive. I've seen you run it, and you've run it in many different places and with
yeah.
different groups. What can attendees expect from these May intensives?
I'm going to say it. They can expect mechanism rich professional development and they can expect us practicing what we preach. So at StepLab, we are obsessive about making sure that our training does what it says on the tin and models all of these different things. So you can expect us building your knowledge by exposing you to the research and the why. You can expect to feel motivated. We will deliver shout outs throughout the day when we see you doing brilliant things. But you can expect to feel really motivated because you as a leader have come with a problem that you're trying to solve and you're going to find solutions. So you're going to be setting goals in things that you can do immediately that you can take back to school, whether that's launching instructional coaching or just beginning with some of the components of it, like group rehearsal, deliberate practice, watching model videos. You can expect to be supported to develop your own techniques. So We are going to be the whole time thinking about getting you thinking and creating lots of opportunity for scripting, practice, rehearsal. You can expect lots of feedback, working in pairs, the Steplab team circulating, listening in on the scripts that you're delivering or the things that you're trying out, receiving feedback from a peer and a pair. And you can also expect us being obsessive about how you're going to embed the changes into your practice. So we never want you to just come to a day of training and then disappear. We want you to stay in touch with us. We want you to feel prompted to go away and do something in school. So you'll feel linked into the Steplab community and hopefully you'll go away and play with the platform, and then you'll have lots of opportunities via Zach to check in, hear how it's going, and feel that social support to actually go away and enact and embed change. So hopefully you will see all singing, all dancing, mechanism rich PD in action and have a lot of fun.
And I think that's it. And it's sort of if you leave here not tired, but a good kind of tired, we didn't do our job, right? You actually have to do stuff. And I think people come into these with so much excitement to be better. And then when we're getting you to rehearse and practice and think about how we're going to make big changes, that's the good kind of tired, the satisfying, the satisfaction of really developing yourself. I'm really looking forward to it. These podcasts, people listen to them year round, so they might miss out, but we do have some in May 2025 in Charlotte, New York City, and the Philadelphia metro area. However, if you're listening to this after that, you can go to educationrickshaw.com/coach, which is where I'm going to be constantly just changing that page to keep the events going. And we're going to have these year round. So if you are looking for great PD in terms of developing your professional development program and instructional coaching, I really encourage you to check that out. We also have a certificate program. It's called the Ambassador program, where you will learn specifically how to lead PD and coach with these mechanisms and using our innovative platform to sort of drive this type of PD and we will kind of keep you accountable and work on your goals and have you work with other people in our ambassador program so that you can get a certificate and really feel confident about your skills. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Any last things you want to say to our audience before we close out?
No, a really big thanks for having me. And I guess Steplab's a game changer. I think the key thing about Steplab and the Steplab team is that everybody has done the job. Everybody's been a teacher. Everyone has been a coach. Everyone has designed PD and grappled with it. And so the whole site is built around solving problems that we encounter as teachers and as teacher educators. And I think that's what makes it such a game changer. And we're so excited about launching it in the US. It's constantly evolving and changing when we learn about new problems. So we also want to hear your feedback. And I think we're excited about shaping it even further with Canada and with the US.
Love it. Thank you, Rachel. You're invited back anytime, of course, to have a chat. And I want to see how things are going. And listeners, please help me spread this podcast around. It's doing well. I would love you, though, to pass it to a principal, give it to a head of department, allow people to start a conversation around evidence-based practices so we can really kind of start a movement and create something and improve the lives of these kids that we work with. Give it a 5-star rating and so on. I appreciate it. Rachel, take care.